I have a bit of a theory that the cheapest car in a manufacturer's lineup is actually the pick of the crop. And the reason for this is that you get all of the essence of what makes that marque special without any of the superfluous fripperies. And I wonder if it's also the case with Porsche. This is the cheapest new Porsche you can buy. It's a 718 Cayman. And 50 years ago, this is the cheapest new Porsche you could buy. This is a 914. And I'm keen to see if they're actually any good. I probably ought to explain why I enjoy base model motoring so much, and it's to do with expectations. And I've been quite fortunate to drive some fairly spicy, valuable machines in my time, and I've always had the same experience that the more expensive something is, the higher my expectations are, and the greater my fall to disappointment is when I then find one tiny little thing that I don't like. Because, well, if you're spending so much money, everything has to be flawless, and things in life are rarely flawless. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, the greatest joy I've had on the road has been in some absolutely worthless bangers. Now, of course, I'm not saying for 1 nanosecond that this Cayman is a worthless banger. No, it's 45,000 quid, and well, it's quite an expenditure for somebody. But the joy of that base model motoring comes from expectations, because if you spend a few hundred quid on something, you expect it to be rubbish. And when it's not, when it does get you there, that's kind of a minor victory. And it's impossible not to form bonds with such hopeless machines at times. Now, some of you will be saying, I'm an idiot, and you won't be the first person to have said that on Carfection. And others, I'm sure you get what I mean. So, for example, I once bought a Rover Metro for 300 quid and drove it to Africa for reasons that made sense in the pub. And I formed such a bond with that car, I absolutely fell in love with it, even though by any metric possible, it was a pretty dreadful machine. So when you go to the other end of the scale, if you might look at maybe Ferraris or Aston Martins, and I'm sure there's no danger of them giving me some car keys sometime soon, my expectations are so high that when the car does something that I don't like, I'm really irritated by it. And that draws me to this. This is the base model car, and as a base model Porsche, it's absolutely fantastic. It does everything that you want. It's quick, it handles well, it's got good steering feel. The things that I don't like are the things that take it over and above that base model spec. So the PDK gearbox, for example, which just about everybody seems to specify, I hate. Now, I am a Luddite, admittedly, but there's still that hesitation in the drivetrain, that hint of lag. And I'm no catchpole, I'm no heel and toe god here, but it takes away involvement and it takes away the enjoyment, because after all, this is a sports car and I want to feel engaged. And it's the same with the engine note. My colleague, Mr. Goy, kind of grumbled about the noise of the 2-litre 4-cylinder engine.
I don't get what Porsche was thinking. Someone let this out of the factory and went, yes, that is a sound that we want heard all over the world.
In the back, and I don't mind that so much, but I can kind of get where he's coming from when he wants that Porsche experience. The noise that I like least in this is actually the tyre noise. This car is fitted with optional larger wheels than standard, and they're painted in black, which means it's going to show up every little bit of curb rash because I can't park for toffee. And that I don't like either. Take those away and you've got an absolutely beautiful car. So let's look at some numbers. This is £45,000, and back 50 years ago, adjusted for today's money, this is approximately £45,000 too. This does 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, which is about 3 and a bit seconds quicker than the most popular selling car in the UK at the moment, the Vauxhall Corsa E, I believe it is. And back in its day, this was approximately 2 to 3 seconds slower than the bestseller at the time, which was the Ford Cortina. There are also other manufacturing parallels too, because they both have the fingers of Volkswagen within them. These are often built at VW's Osnabrück plant in Germany, and this too was built by VW in Osnabrück. So there's quite a cool parallel between these. Even the colour, this is supposedly Porsche's racing yellow, which I believe is actually the racing colour of Malaysia and Belgium and 1 or 2 other places, but it is a fairly startling shade. I have always wanted to drive one of these. In fact, I'd rather like to own one. Now, as a motoring journalist, I really should be able to change gear without having to look down at the gears, but they're all in there somewhere. I was kind of surprised that this got a 5-speed box. This is a 2-litre model. They came in a 1.7 and 1.8 and a 2-litre and 4-cylinder, and then of course they did a limited run of 6-cylinder cars, which was sort of dangerously close to 911 money and therefore not that popular. And they actually built 2, to my knowledge, 8-cylinder cars, one of which was given as a gift to Mr. Porsche himself but he didn't like it very much, so the story goes, and it was pretty promptly dumped in the museum. The interesting thing with that car, with an 8-cylinder engine in something this size, was that it had something like 260 bhp, so probably almost 4 times the power that this model has. Now this, even though I'm pottering along at way below the limits here, this is pretty demanding, especially with sheep on the road. It's a pretty demanding thing to drive. I don't want any more power than this. This is fun enough as it is. I think it's just absolutely perfect for open roads like this. There is an interesting little snippet of history associated with this car in motorsport. Now the 914 actually competed at Le Mans and competed fairly successfully in endurance racing, but it wasn't really built as a racer. I think these cars are best suited to Californian roads and happy sunshine where those rust blebs can be kept at bay. Another interesting motorsport twist is that it was the first safety car to be used in Formula One. But because it was the 1970s and everything was always a little bit higgledy-piggledy and had nowhere near the accuracy of today's motorsport, it actually backed up the wrong car. So the car that won that first safety car controlled F1 race wasn't the real winner at all. The real winner had pulled in when he hadn't pulled in, and the award was given to somebody else, which is kind of so 70s and arse about face that I love it. What is it with imperfection that just draws you in? Now the geeks will know that this car really should have been born as a Volkswagen. There was a deal, a production deal done between Porsche and VW where the idea was they would actually market this as a Volkswagen in many markets, and of course by the time it went to production it was a fully fledged Porsche. But it was made in the same factory in Osnabrück that I think my new Cayman was made in, and the ties between those companies are older than just those 50 years that separate these two models. They're well and truly ensconced together. It's difficult to review a car like this through modern eyes because of course this is 50 years old. This car has got at least 50 years, half a century of wear and tear in it. So that bagginess in the steering, I don't know whether they're all like that when it left the factory half a century ago, or whether it's just this particular model that's worn out. And look at me having to look for the gears. It's like the gear knob is pretty baggy and we've got a dog leg first and you have to think about what gear you want to be in. Nothing like with the DSG, but of course far more entertaining than the DSG. I think if you put the smile cam on, you'll see I've been far happier driving this than the modern car. But the twist is I wouldn't want to have driven this car 300 or 400 miles to a shoot. I think I would have been fairly exhausted doing that. But what a great car to have tucked away for a sunny Sunday. Oh, it leans. I really enjoyed driving both of those cars. They both have that Porsche essence that makes them really involving and really good fun. Let's start with the 914. I mean, that is very much a 50-year-old car, and you'd wonder whether, okay, were they all like that when they left the factory, or is this one just a little bit baggy and used because it had 50 years of enjoyment with it? And yes, it's compromised as a day-to-day car, and you certainly don't want to get it wet, but my God, I loved it. It was such fun. The 718, now that's interesting. This is kind of a Porsche you can use every day, and the price, of course, is pretty appealing. But the bits I don't like about it kind of prove my point that the base model is better. This car's got about 10 grand's worth of options on it, including those black painted rims, black and rear lights, plastic trim on the steering wheel, and of course the PDK gearbox. And it was that I disliked the most. Now, a lot of people love it. A lot of people appreciate it, makes you go that little bit quicker, but I want more involvement from my sports car, and I'm also, of course, a grumpy old Luddite. So I'd take this car without the 10K's worth of options, and it would be pretty much a perfect sports car. And the £10,000 I'd saved, I'd actually buy one of these, because then I've got something really engaging for the weekend, and I think that is a win-win.